Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Gracia. I'm a third year political science and international development student at the University of Toronto. I am a session coordinator for pre-law shadowers. So yeah, we're an organization dedicated to educating students and helping them on their path and their journey in like legal studies and legal career. So today we have the lovely guest, Mathura. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you for that. As Gracie said, my name is Mathura Santhirasegaram. I'm currently a lawyer at Diamond and Diamond. My areas of practice are class actions and mass torts. And I was called to the bar in 2017. I'm going into, I guess, my sixth year of practice now. And I think my journey to where I am now is definitely different. I've sort of taken various different paths to get to where I am, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we're gonna get right into the interview. So the first question is, at what point in your life do you think you decided to pursue a career in law?
Sure. So for me, it was pretty early on. I knew in high school that I wanted to do law. I took a law course, I think it was in grade 10. And I fell in love with it. And I never had any backup plans. So for me, it was very early on. And I was very singularly focused on law from high school.
Thank you. I mean, that's probably, I feel like I've heard a lot of diverse answers. So I always hear like, people who know from like the age of 12. And then
Mhm.
some people find an undergrad, some other lawyers find out like later in their masters and stuff. So that's great that you had that kind of certainty. So, knowing that you had this interest, how did it affect your undergrad? Like what programs did you take? And like, is there any specific courses do you think that like really solidified that interest for you?
Yeah, I think it was an interest that was very much already established by the time I got into undergrad. So I knew that I was going to be applying to law school, and like most undergrads, you kind of had the option of either going after your second year or completing your undergrad entirely. And for me, it was never an option not to complete my undergrad. I always wanted to have that as sort of a baseline. So my undergraduate degree, which was years and years and years ago at this point, was I think it was like a sociology, social science degree. So nothing too substantial. And it was an interesting program in that it was interdisciplinary. So what it did allow me to do was really focus on areas that I found interesting. And so the three areas that I focused on were law, sociology, and gender studies. And that sort of interacted and intersected throughout, I would say, my sort of educational career. So I also did a master's once I completed my undergrad, and there's sort of a gap between my undergrad and my master's, and I'm sure we can get into how I eventually went to law school, but that's all part and parcel with it. But what ended up happening was through my master's, I sort of continued the same three focuses, and that led to law school eventually.
And if you don't mind me asking, what did you do your master's in?
Sure. So it was also interdisciplinary studies, and it was at York University. And again, three areas of focus, and it was the same three areas of focus. And so my master's thesis actually looked at skin lightening ads, which are quite prevalent in my community, and looking at sort of the comparisons and the type of advertising that's used. So there's what we call lifestyle advertising that's used in skin lightening ads. And that's similar to what was historically used for tobacco advertising. And so I was looking at sort of the advertising regime and comparing and contrasting.
Yeah, sounds super interesting.
Hmm.
So you went into law school after your master's, right? So how was your experience like with the LSAT and everything? Like, did you start studying afterwards, or how did you manage?
Yeah, so like I said, my master's kind of came in the middle of my journey to law school. And the reason for that was I came out of undergrad knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I wrote the LSAT more than once, and I applied to law school. And this is like a really big part of my story. And I think it's one that's really important because it really shaped who I am today. And it gave me a lot of resilience. So I applied to law school. I didn't get in the first time, and I have a very supportive family. And so the first question they asked me was, "What next?" And I did not know. I had no answers. I was lost. I had no clue what I was going to do. And so my parents sort of pushed me to come up with three sort of backup plans in the next month, because they were like, you really need to execute something now. Because if you're not going to do law, you need to figure out what you're going to do. And I think I wrote teachers college as my first backup, and I think I wrote master's as my second, and I left the third blank, because I just knew that I had to try again. But I knew that I had to do something different if I was going to be considered in my second go around. And so for me, the best option was to do a master's degree. And I think it was great because it sort of pushed me to stay in that sort of educational sphere. I had worked between my undergrad and my master's. And so I'd been out of sort of schooling for about a year. And then I went back into it, and it really did prepare me for the vast amount of readings and all of that you do through law school. So that sort of failure really kind of shaped the resilience that I think continued through my sort of journey to where I am now. And I'm, again, like, I'll kind of get into that, I'm sure, as you kind of ask me more and more about my law school experience. But in terms of pre-law, I don't know that there is, any one thing that I could suggest. But for me, it was the determination, the resilience. It's not an easy process. The LSAT did not come naturally to me. I'm pretty sure I burned my LSAT books when I was done for the last time. So for me, it was very much, okay, this is something I have to do to get to the next step. And so I just kept pushing myself to do it. But I am not one of those savants where it came naturally to me by any means.
No, and honestly, it's really helpful to hear those experiences, especially because, as students, as undergrad students, like
Mhm.
sometimes I get like, oh, am I not going to have a high enough GPA? Or what if I don't pass the first time? Or is that like the end of the journey?
Yeah. And
So
it's
thank you for
absolutely
that.
not. Yeah. And that's
So we
why I think that's really important to stress, because it doesn't always happen in a straight line. So.
Great. Okay, so Fiona, I think you have a question.
Yes, I did. At first, I just wanted to say thank you so much for responding and being here and like doing this with us. My question was about how long did you wait until the first time you took the LSAT to retake it?
So it's so long ago now, but I want to say I did it 2 more times, but I might have just done it once. But I think for me, so I had actually signed up, and I don't know if they still exist, but it was the Kaplan course at the time. And they sort of had this guarantee where if you didn't do as well as you thought, I think within the month you could redo the course. And so I took advantage of that, and I redid the course, and then I kind of gave myself a couple of months to really study and feel more prepared. The other thing that I think was really integral for me, I'm very much a creature of my environment. And the first time I wrote my LSAT, I wrote it at York University. And that experience was quite traumatizing. You write it with about 1,000 other people. I was the first person in the first row. So anytime they said pencils down, they looked at me first. And it was an anxiety inducing experience. And so I knew the second time around that I couldn't do that again. So I ended up actually writing the LSAT the second time at, I think it was Humber College. And so it was in a classroom. I think there were 30 of us. It was much more relaxed. And I think that showed because I recall my score going up quite significantly. So for me, that first experience with 1,000 people, high stress, that did not help me at all. So the second time around, writing it in that more relaxed atmosphere, that really, really, really helped.
Thank you.
Of course, that I can't even imagine being in a room with 1,000 people. I mean, I'm already in my lectures with like 200. It's like, oh no, I can't. It's too
Yeah.
much. So that sounds really stressful. But yeah, so you went to Windsor College, or Windsor University, right, for
University of
your law?
Windsor. Yeah.
Yes. So how was that experience?
So it was interesting. I will say, so I had a bit of an overlap with my master's and law school. I ended up having to come back to Toronto around my first year midterms to defend my thesis. So it was my first year was quite stressful, second year was no better, and third year was even more stressful. So I think what I always tell people about law school is, if you're going to do law, make sure you really want to do it, because it is it's a great experience. Like I really loved my experience at Windsor. It's a very community oriented school. We were very collegial with each other. We relied on each other a lot, and there was a sort of ingrained support system there. But law school is not easy, as we all know. And for me, first year was I moved away from home for the first time. So there was a lot of sort of personal things that I had to get used to. And of course, when you're doing that in a new city with new people, in law school, so it's a lot. And I think for me, what I learned through my first year was you really do have to rely on like your colleagues and your students, and collegiality really is important, and Windsor was a great place for that. So first year I really kind of enjoyed the courses, getting to know people, making those friendships and relationships, and I didn't really focus much on getting a 1L job in my summer. I was told by many people that 1L summer is kind of your last summer. After that, you kind of really get thrown into it. And so I took advantage of the summer between my first and second year, and I traveled. I went to Italy with one of my best friends, and then I actually went to Sri Lanka, where I'm originally from, and I did an internship at a law firm there. And it was a really interesting experience. I can tell you, law firms, the way that they operate in Sri Lanka is very different from how they operate here, but it was a great introductory experience for me. And I will say that that 1L summer experience was something that was different. And I think when I applied to jobs in my second year, in between my second and third year, and I was called in for interviews, that was the one thing that people were really interested in. They were curious about, the legal system in Sri Lanka. How does it work? Well, what kind of, how do their courts work? And so that sort of interesting experience for me, because I sort of went the non-traditional route, ended up being great conversation starters when I was applying for jobs. And so, that was great. But when you're in your second and third year, it's very much a push for you to work on getting those jobs, right? So we're working on getting the summer jobs, and then those summer student positions that eventually transition to articling. If you aren't one of the fortunate few who get a summer student position in between your second and third year, then you're really pushing to get an articling position in your third year. So for me, I wasn't one of the people who got a second year summer position. And so for me, in my third year, I was really sort of balancing, studying, getting those good grades, but also sending out hundreds of applications because I needed an articling position. So third year was quite stressful. I really, really relied on my support network to kind of get me through that. And ultimately, I had to make a decision because I was very focused on the types of firms that I was applying to. I had a vision of where I saw myself ending up. I can tell you now that vision, it's not who I am. Like I know now that that's not what I was meant to do. But at the time, and I think a lot of law schools tend to kind of push you in a certain direction. And I very much believe that that was the direction that was meant for me. So I ultimately had to make a decision because I knew I wasn't going to end up where I thought I wanted to be. And so I ended up actually going through the LPP program, and we can talk about that later, or I can talk about that now. But that eventually sort of was the catalyst for my very interesting journey to where I am now. But third year for me was probably the most stressful because I was very concerned about whether I was actually going to be able to become a lawyer after all of this work that I put in, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a stressful experience, but you have to kind of take those moments to really try and enjoy the experience as much as you can. And anytime that I felt overwhelmed, the one thing I would fall back on is like I don't want to do anything else. So I'm gonna just keep pushing through.
No, definitely. No, you used the word resilience before, and it's very obvious that with with your journey and everything you're saying, that is very much who you are. So yeah, so thank you again for sharing your stories and your experiences. There's one thing that you mentioned of like, the
Mm,
non-traditional route, which I feel like
mm,
is so important because especially, in like academia and all those things
yeah.
in our undergrads and just even when like media and stuff you have like this idea of like how things are supposed to turn out, so it's nice to know about other options and like that things even if they don't work out exactly as you thought they would be, they still work out in your favor.
Mhm.
So having said that, you did mention LPP. I
Mm.
don't know what that is, so
Sure,
could you
let me
expand on
explain
that?
it. Sure. So it's the law placement program, and it's run in conjunction with Ryerson. So when I was in law school, I think they were doing sort of a pilot 3-year program, and I joined in their second year. So it was very much not my first, like it wasn't my first choice. And at that point, the LPP wasn't very well known. And so there was a lot of sort of questions about whether it would stack up to articling. And so I, at sort of the last sort of possible moment, decided, okay, you know what, I'm gonna do the LPP and I'm gonna focus on school. I cannot do both at this point. Like I can't continue to do applying for articling positions and trying to get like the A's that I need to get in law school. So I very much decided that the LPP was there for a reason. So I was gonna go that route. And so the LPP program is, like I said, it's a little different. It's run through Ryerson, and basically the way that it works is in your first 4 months you do sort of like a classroom based, um, it's classroom based. So they sort of organize you into these mini law firms, and you run files. And so we had a family law file, we had a wills and estates file, we had a real estate file, I think we had a civil litigation file. And you basically get the experience. They hire actors actually from Ryerson's acting school to play our clients. And so it was great because law school is very theoretical, and you come out of law school and you know all the theories, you know the legislation, but you have no way of knowing how to apply that. And the Ryerson LPP program gave me that like out the gate. Like it we were doing client intakes, we were talking to our clients, we were in court, we were doing mediations, and they have very, very experienced lawyers that come in and sit on panels who act as mentors. And one of my mentors was actually Daryl Singer, who's my current boss at Diamond and Diamond. So he heads up our class actions group at Diamond and Diamond. So he was one of my mentors during my first 4 months. And the way that it works is once you're done your first 4 months, the next 4 months you actually get placed. And that could be at a law firm downtown. It could be at a sole practitioner's. It could be in-house, or like me, you could get placed with the government. So you still do applications and you go through the interview process, and eventually you get, hopefully selected. And so I ended up at what was then the Ministry of Children and Community Services. And so I did my placement there. And then I was hired back as counsel once I was called to the bar. I eventually transitioned over to the Ministry of Education. And then I kind of realized that as much as I really enjoyed that process, I was a part of some really important things like the update to the Child and Family Services legislation. It became the Child, Youth, and Family Act. And it was really important work, but I felt like I was so disconnected because I was working at such a high level. And I've always been the kind of person who likes to kind of see things through from start to finish. And that wasn't something that was being fulfilled for me. So it just so happened that my contract at Ministry of Education was not renewed. And so it was kind of a perfect opportunity for me to then transition over to private. And so I did, and I eventually ended up at a firm doing a special project for them on, it was a firm on Bay Street, and that's where I always thought I would end up. So when I ended up there, it was great because I got the experience that I thought I always wanted, but I very quickly realized that it wasn't a fit for me. It wasn't quite what I wanted out of my legal career. And so I eventually sort of connected back to some of my work as a student. And so some of the work that I did with Ministry of Community and Social Services and Children and Families was child protection work. So I worked with CAS's And that was really important work for me, and it was something I wanted to connect back to. So I actually ended up at a law firm that practices in family law, and they did some child protection work. And so I did that for about a year. And it was great. I got to kind of live out what I was hoping to. And then after the year and COVID, I sort of realized that I didn't know if family law was going to be something that was sustainable for me. So I actually reached out to my old mentor, Daryl Singer, and it just so happened that he had an opening on his team on the class actions side. And so I interviewed and I ended up where I am today. But that never would have, that never would have happened for me if I didn't go the LPP route. I mean, I might have been doing something else entirely. So that's why I say, like, sometimes the path that you take in life, it might not be the traditional one, but it might end up taking you to exactly where you're meant to be. And I am the happiest I've ever been. I'm very fulfilled in my role. I love what I do. And I can't necessarily say that I went to work every day before this feeling as fulfilled and happy. So, that non-traditional route through the LPP led me to Daryl, who eventually led me over to Diamond and Diamond. And I'm so grateful for it.
That's a really beautiful story and super inspiring. So thank you so much and congratulations
Thank
for
you.
being where you are. So right now, with Diamond and Diamond, like could you explain more of like your day to day and like your
Sure.
position there?
Yeah, so it's it's interesting, and I don't know if other lawyers say this, but no 2 days look the same for me. So that is especially true because of my practice area and my file load. We have class actions relating to various different things. We deal with institutional sexual assault. We deal with product negligence, consumer protection. We deal with the government. So no two files are kind of run the same way. I can tell you this week alone, I'm working on some things that have to do with long-term care homes, but I'm also dealing with a file that has to do with an apartment fire that ended up displacing hundreds of tenants and residents. So no 2 days look the same. A lot of what I do is client management. With class actions work, it's a little slower moving than most litigation. So we're looking at 5+ years of litigation. Sometimes it takes a year or two to even get to the first step, which we call certification. So um, and I can kind of explain what certification is, because to be honest, I didn't know what it was until I started doing what I'm doing now. But basically, a class action needs to be certified or approved by the court. So just because you start a class action doesn't make it one. It does require court approval, and there's a legal test that needs to be met for that. So that is sort of your first big hurdle when it comes to a class action, and so a lot of our files are kind of moving towards that. We just had a big certification hearing that we were successful with recently, and so it's interesting because a lot of what I do is sort of preparation for. I don't necessarily, like most litigators, spend the bulk of my time necessarily in court. So while that is a big part of what I do, it's not necessarily a big part of what I do on a day to day.
So, having said that, you do have a really diverse, clientele and everything. But do you feel like there are cases that you deal with more often than others?
Yeah, so I would say for class actions, the bulk of our files, has to do with product negligence, failure to warn, duties to report. Like I mentioned, we do have a big sort of broad umbrella of institutional sexual assault, whether that's churches, school boards, whatever the case may be. But negligence is sort of an overarching, area that we deal with, because a lot of what class actions aim to do is to modify the behavior of these large corporations so that something like this doesn't happen again. And that's true for whether we're dealing with long-term care homes and the government, or the owners and operators of these homes, or if we're dealing with breast implants and the manufacturers of those products. The goal is still the same. It's not just compensation, it's also behavior modification, because you don't want to keep relitigating the same kind of issues.
So, what do you think you like most about, the field that you work in and like, the cases that you take on?
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, I'm the kind of person I really enjoy variety. And so that is something that I get in my current practice. Like I said, no two files are really the same. Um, and I deal with probably thousands of clients. So it's interesting because a lot of what I do is talking to these clients and getting their stories. And that's something that I really enjoyed when I was a family law lawyer. That was probably the aspect of that I enjoyed the most, actually. And I think I don't know that all family law lawyers would say that, but that for me was really important, connecting with the client. And so that's something that I really enjoy, and kind of seeing how, a lot of these clients, before they come to us, they do a lot of this sort of advocating for themselves on their own. And so it's really nice when you can step into that role and you can kind of tell them to take a seat and like let us kind of do that advocating for you, because that's our job. So that for me is really important, and probably the thing that I enjoy the most. I think as lawyers, that is sort of an overarching theme, right? That's kind of why most of us go to law school. We like that advocating component of what it means to be a lawyer, and that's probably what I connect with the most.
And you deal with so many different clients, but is there one that you see more often than another?
Yeah, so with class actions, we have what we call representative plaintiffs. So these are the people whose names go on the statements of claim that we eventually issue. It's their names that get put out in the public record. And so we work, pretty much exclusively with these representative plaintiffs on behalf of the larger class. So my interactions with them are much more frequent, because we're often gathering evidence from them, and it's their stories that really push the litigation forward. So they are the ones that we deal with more on the day-to-day. And when it comes to sort of the larger class, it's more so answering any questions they may have, providing updates to them.
Okay. So you've told me like the thing that you like the most, right? About, the diversity and just talking about like having a relationship with your clients and stuff. But so what do you think is the hardest part about your job, and like the thing that you maybe dislike?
Dislike, yeah. So it's funny because I actually think it's sort of also the thing that I really like. Like sometimes it can be difficult dealing with clients. I think we know that. I worked in customer service all through kind of high school and university, and so it sort of prepared me for that. But I mean, I think as much as I enjoy that, that can also sometimes be the hardest thing, because I don't necessarily have sophisticated clients. I'm not dealing with institutions as clients. I'm dealing with individuals. And so sometimes it can be hard to kind of explain the difference between like morality and legality. Just because something is morally wrong does not necessarily mean that there's legal compensation for it. So that sort of nuance is sometimes lost with clients, and I can completely understand why. But that's sometimes the hardest part. And even for me, sometimes it's the hardest part to reconcile when you very clearly know that something is wrong and there's just no legal avenue within which to pursue it. That can be hard to kind of reconcile sometimes.
Definitely. I don't, I mean, dealing with people can be really difficult. So especially when it's your everyday job, that just takes again a lot of resilience, a lot of determination. So there's a lot of, I guess, misconceptions around law and like lawyers and like the everyday work that you do. So
Mhm.
especially when we see like movies and TV shows like Suits or Legally Blonde or something. So do you feel like there are any myths about lawyers or about like the legal career that you want to debunk?
Sure. So one that I get very often is, I think most people think that lawyers are super argumentative, and I'm not. In my personal life, I'm the last person to debate a topic. I like to leave work at work, and I feel like a lot of the skills that I kind of take from being a lawyer more so have to deal with, like I like counseling and things like that. I'm not an adversarial person by nature. When I was a family law lawyer, I definitely took more of a cooperative and a combative approach. But I think that, there's this misnomer that lawyers are like these hired guns that just go to town, and that's not always the case. So even with clients, sometimes you have to kind of, remind them that it's not our jobs as lawyers to simply advocate an unreasonable position. It's our jobs to provide the legal advice and make sure that our clients are being reasonable and to advocate for them in a reasonable manner. And so there's this, I think that's sort of what I found is like the biggest misconception that I come across sort of on a day-to-day.
Perfect, thank you. And do you feel like, looking back, to your journey in undergrad and law school, is there any advice that you would have given yourself, whether it's undergrad, whether it's, in that time in between your undergrad and your master's?
Sure. So I think I would have told myself to like enjoy the process a little more. I definitely stressed myself out much more than I needed to. And again, like I said, I was so married to this idea of what a traditional law path looks like, and mine was not that. And so it was very stressful because I wasn't sure if me veering so far off what I thought was the path that I was supposed to go down was going to result in me not being able to practice as a lawyer at all. And that wasn't the case. So like, I think it's really important to remember that no two paths are the same. I know you guys have done this series for a really long time, and I'm sure every lawyer you talk to has a different story, a different path, and I think that's really important because going into law school, I don't know that that's necessarily a message that is advertised. I feel like it's very much this, you get a 1L position, you get a summer L position in your second year, and then you get an article position, and then you end up on Bay Street. And that's not the case for everyone. And I didn't actually know that there were so many different opportunities out there until I went into the LPP program and I realized that, oh, maybe I want to do in-house. Maybe I want to be an in-house counsel. That seems interesting. And, I had no idea about all of the different positions available with the provincial government and how interesting that work could be. So, these are really important things to keep in mind. And I wish that I had that knowledge when I was in law school, because maybe I wouldn't have put as much pressure on myself and I could have really kind of enjoyed that process of being in law school, because that was the last time I was going to be in school a little bit more. Like I would have enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, doing these interviews and like these sessions with different lawyers, you get to hear about so many different experiences. But just like your story is very different, I feel like it's been really helpful for me and hopefully for other people who have watched, to know like that there's so many different opportunities and like, it's really difficult to know about those things. Like I would have never known about an LPP program had I not, had this conversation with you. So there's like a lot of beauty in hearing other people's stories because again, like every student that's applying is different as well, so it's good to know that there are so many different pathways, even if we're taught to follow just one. So having said that, your advice to yourself, which may be applicable to other people, do you feel like there's advice that you would have for the up and coming generation of lawyers?
Sure. So I think, so I mean, I have a student who was very recently called to the bar and became an associate. And one thing I always told her was, and is, have confidence. So I remember when I was, just starting out as a lawyer with the government, and I felt like I had imposter syndrome. Like I was like, oh, I don't know. I shouldn't be here. Like I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea what they're asking me. But you learn, and you have to have a certain amount of confidence in that. And I remember talking to a senior lawyer, and she must have been about 30 years out. And I asked her if that feeling ever goes away, and she said no. She said you just get more comfortable with it. And so that has sort of resonated with me, because what she was saying is, if you ever get to the point where you feel like you know everything, that's a problem. The law is constantly evolving. Things are constantly changing. Our world is constantly changing. So we are always, as lawyers, in this constant process of growth and learning. And so, there's always going to be something that you don't know. And that's okay. And so for me, that was like my biggest takeaway, because I still, there are definitely days where I'm like, oh, I don't know, this is like way above my like pay grade. But having the confidence to know, okay, no, like I know what I'm doing, and like being able to present that. I will say, like on my current team, I work with the managing partner, Santhirasegaram, who's wonderful. She's, just amazing. And she really empowers the young female associates at our firm. She regularly will take us out for dinners and really drives home the point that, in a world that's sort of dominated by men, as women, we should and we can and we will have the confidence. And so coming, into this team has really allowed me to really be confident to put my position forward. If I disagree with something that we're doing strategically, I have no qualms about saying it. That was something that I wasn't comfortable doing as a junior, of course, and I'm still very much a junior on my team, but I think being empowered by the higher ups and again, like that initial conversation I had with that lawyer when I was first a lawyer with the government, that really taught me that it's okay. Like I will never know everything, and that's all right, but I'm confident enough to be able to voice my opinions. And I think sometimes as women, we don't do that. And it's very easy not to do that if you're on a Zoom call with, 6 male lawyers and you're the only female lawyer. I regularly will get asked by clients if we're on, Zoom calls, if I'm the assistant. And so having the confidence has really helped when things like that happen. And that's probably the biggest advice I'd have.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. As a woman, it's really good to hear because again, like any advice, from, we're trying to work to where you are now, so it's really great to hear those, words of wisdom. So, I'd like to take this moment if any of the guests have any other questions from everyone. Feel free to ask.
I don't really have any questions. I just, again, just hearing your story is absolutely amazing. I recently graduated from York University, and now I want to, I want to do law. I think it's something I've always wanted to do, but I'm just always constantly second guessing myself. So now I'm gonna take the steps to start studying for my LSAT. And I guess I always wanted to do family law or maybe immigration law, but hearing about like what you do, I guess I didn't even think that maybe that was a thing. I don't know.
I didn't know it was a thing. I
Yeah.
did not know it was a thing until I spoke to Daryl and he told me about it. And then I did my research because I was like, oh, maybe this is something for me. I didn't know it existed. And I'm constantly learning every day on this team because I've been at Diamond for 2 years now. And this is a completely new area of practice for me. But there are so many different areas of law that you can go into. And I say this to everyone who, I meet, like, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I know, Fiona, you do have my contact information. So that offer is always out there. I was mentored quite a bit coming up, and I think it's really important to give that back. So that's sort of across the board offer, and I'm more than happy to do that for anyone
Thank you
that
so much.
that wants it. But there are so many different areas of law, and so I think it's really important that you don't get bogged down. And I know that law schools are also realizing that. So for example, Windsor Law actually has a class actions clinic, I believe. They didn't have that when I went to law school. And there's all these new areas of law that they're, visiting more and more. So like Indigenous law was, again, something that probably wasn't really taught like 10 years ago. It was a new course when I went to law school. And I think it's a really important area of law for all of us. So there's certainly, all these diverse areas, and you can intersect them however you want. But yeah, it's really important to remember that, because we think of family law, we think of criminal law, those are like the big ones, and of course we think of corporate law. So yeah, but again, like any questions, if you have outside of this, I'm more than happy to connect with you.
I'm sure I can think of so many. I currently work for a real estate law firm as like an admin assistant, and it's kind of shown me I don't really want to do real estate law. I'd much rather do something that I'm more passionate about. But yeah. And it's also just really great to just hear your experience and where you talk about like not going the traditional route. I think that's so important.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me. I really do appreciate it.
Of course, no, thank you. So, if there's anything, if there's nothing else, I just want to thank the people who attended, Fiona and Ashmi. I hope I'm saying that right. And a huge thank you to Mathura. Thank you so much. Your story is super inspiring again. And, I learned so much and just, feel like, I can do it.
Yeah, no, you
Um,
definitely can. You definitely can.
yes. So thank you again. I hope everyone has an amazing night. And yes. Oh.
Thank you. Have a
Thank you
great
very
night,
much.
everyone.
You as well.